The train from Naples to Milan carried us north through Italy, leaving behind the chaotic beauty of the south for the sleek efficiency of the north. Milan appeared through the window as a modern city, skyscrapers and business districts, fashion houses and financial centers. It felt like a different country from the Naples we just left. My head still hurt from the concussion, a constant dull ache that reminded me of my stupidity in those tunnels. Mariana had barely let me out of her sight since the incident, and I couldn't blame her. I'd promised, again, to be more careful, to not let curiosity override common sense. This time, I meant it. "How are you feeling?" Mariana asked, noticing me wince as the train jostled. "I'm okay, just a headache. The doctor said it would take a few days." "You scared me, Peter. Really scared me." "I know. I'm sorry. Again." She took my hand. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad. We only have a few more days in Europe. I don't want to spend them worrying about you getting lost in ancient tunnels or chasing dangerous mysteries. You won't have to. I learned my lesson. From now on, if I investigate anything, if it's with you carefully and only if it's safe, I'll hold you to that." Milan greeted us with autumn sunshine and a crispness in the air that reminded me winter was coming. We'd spent the entire summer and fall traveling, and now October was ending. Mariana's visa would expire in 6 days. In 6 days, we'd be on a plane to Sao Paulo, starting an entirely new chapter. But first, Milan, and then Verona. One last week in Europe before everything changed. Our hotel was near the Duomo, Milan's famous Gothic cathedral that dominates the city center. After checking in, we spent the afternoon exploring, walking through the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II with its beautiful glass arcade and expensive shops, standing in the massive piazza in front of the Duomo and marveling at the forest of spires and statues that covered every surface. "It's so different from southern Italy," Mariana observed. "Everything is so organized, clean, efficient. Milan is the business capital. Rome is the political capital, but Milan is where the money is. It's always been more connected to the rest of Europe. Switzerland and France are right there. Different culture from Rome or Naples." That evening, we found ourselves walking past Teatro alla Scala, one of the world's most famous opera houses. The building itself was surprisingly modest from the outside, none of the Baroque excess of other Italian opera houses. Just a simple neoclassical facade. But everyone knew what happened inside those walls. Some of the greatest operatic performances in history had premiered there. "Have you ever been to an opera?" Mariana asked. "Once in Chicago. A client had extra tickets. I didn't really understand it, to be honest. Everyone was very serious, and I kept waiting for something exciting to happen." She laughed. "Opera is not for everyone. I love it, though. My grandmother used to listen to recordings all the time. Pavarotti, Callas, all the greats. I grew up hearing those voices." We found a small cafe near the opera house, one of those places that clearly catered to musicians and opera aficionados rather than tourists. The walls were covered with posters from past performances, and the coffee was served in actual china cups rather than paper. We were sitting by the window when a group of older men came in, probably in their 70s or 80s, all dressed elegantly, speaking rapid Italian. They took a table near us, and their conversation was animated, full of gestures and what sounded like passionate argument. Mariana was trying to follow along, her Italian good enough to catch fragments. "They're talking about opera," she said quietly, "about performances they've seen. One of them is saying something about, I think he's talking about a performance that doesn't exist? I'm not understanding correctly." One of the men raised his voice, clearly making an important point, and we heard L'Opera Perduta clearly. The lost opera. Mariana's eyes widened. "Did you hear that? The lost opera?" She leaned closer to listen, and I watched her face as she concentrated on the Italian. After a few minutes, she turned to me with an expression of intrigue. "Peter, they're talking about a legendary performance. From 1953, at La Scala. They're saying everyone who was there, everyone, agrees it was the most perfect operatic performance ever witnessed. But there's no record of it. No recording, no photographs, nothing official. Like it never happened. Despite my promise to not chase mysteries, I felt that familiar pull of curiosity. That doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't there be any record? That's what they're debating. One of them thinks the recording was lost in a fire. Another says the soprano was from a small town and nobody thought to document it. But the third one, she listened more carefully. He's saying something else. Something about it being deliberately erased. Forbidden. Forbidden opera? That sounds very Italian. After the men left, we asked our waiter about it. He was young, probably didn't know the story firsthand, but he'd heard the legend. L'opera perduta, he confirmed. Yes, I have heard this story. It is famous among people who love La Scala. There was a performance, they say, in 1953, La Traviata, I think, with a soprano nobody had heard of before. She was magnificent, they say, but after that night she disappeared. And there is no recording, no pictures. Some people think it is just a story, a legend. Others insist it happened but was covered up for some reason. Why would it be covered up? Mariana asked. He shrugged. Politics, probably. Everything in Italy in those years was politics. The war had just ended, there was the Cold War, the government was paranoid. Maybe she said something wrong, maybe she was a communist, who knows? But if you want to know more, you should ask Professor Benetti. He teaches at the conservatory and knows everything about La Scala's history. Back at our hotel, I looked at Mariana. So, what do you think? Investigate or ignore? She considered. If we investigate, we do it together. Carefully. No running off alone. No sneaking into restricted areas. We talk to people, do research, but safely. Can you handle that? I can handle that. And honestly, after Naples, I'm not eager to take stupid risks. But I am curious about this. An opera performance erased from history? That's genuinely strange. Agreed. Tomorrow we find Professor Benetti. The Milan Conservatory was a beautiful old building not far from La Scala. Professor Benetti turned out to be a man in his late 60s with wild gray hair and an obvious passion for opera that manifested in the way he gestured dramatically while talking. L'opera perduta, he exclaimed when we asked. Yes, I know this story well. It is one of the great mysteries of La Scala. Come, sit, I will tell you. His office was crammed with books, scores, recordings, and posters. We sat in chairs that were covered in sheet music until he cleared them off. The performance was on October 17, 1953, he began. La Traviata, Verdi's masterpiece. The soprano was Giulia Ferretti, a young woman from a small town near Lake Como. She was not famous. She had never sung at La Scala before. But someone important heard her sing at a regional competition and gave her a chance. What happened during the performance? I asked. Magic, according to everyone who was there. Her voice was described as celestial. Her acting profound. People wept openly. At the end, the applause lasted for 20 minutes. It was, by all accounts, one of those rare moments of absolute perfection in art. So why is there no record? Professor Benetti's expression grew more serious. That is the question, yes? The official story is that the recording equipment malfunctioned. The photographs did not turn out. But, he leaned forward conspiratorially, there are other stories. Stories that the performance was deliberately erased. Why? Mariana asked. There are many theories. Some say Giulia was involved with a married important politician and the scandal was covered up. Some say she was secretly Jewish or communist and someone wanted to erase her from history. Some say she offended someone powerful. But the truth? He spread his hands. Nobody knows for certain. What we do know is that after that night, Giulia Ferretti never performed publicly again. She disappeared from the opera world completely. What happened to her? I asked. She died in 1985, I believe. Lived quietly in her hometown. Never spoke about that night. Never sang professionally again. It is very sad. Is there anyone still alive who was there that night? Mariana asked. Professor Benetti thought. Perhaps. It was 70 years ago, but there could be some very elderly people who attended. And, he paused. There is something else you should know. About 10 years ago, a researcher tried to investigate this story for a book. She was given access to La Scala's archives, and she found something interesting. Some documents about that performance had been classified, restricted by government order. The government classified opera documents? I said, that seems extreme. Yes, which suggests the truth is more interesting and more sensitive than simple technical failures or personal scandals. If the government felt the need to restrict access to these documents, there was probably a political dimension. He gave us the name of the researcher, a woman named Dr. Simona Marchetti, who now worked at the University of Milan. We thanked him and left, Mariana's eyes shining with the thrill of the hunt. This is actually fascinating, she said as we walked back toward the city center. A performance erased from history for political reasons? It's like something from a movie. Are you sure you want to pursue this? We could just enjoy Milan, see the sights, not dig into 70-year-old mysteries. Peter, you want to investigate. I can see it in your face. And honestly, I'm curious too. But we do this together and we do it smart. We talk to people, we do research, but we don't take risks. Deal? Deal. Dr. Marchetti agreed to meet us at a cafe near the university. She was in her 40s, serious but warm, and she remembered her research into l'opera Perduta clearly. It was frustrating, she admitted. I knew there was a real story there, but I kept hitting walls. The documents that were classified, I tried to get access through official channels, but it was refused. When I pushed, I was told that the matter involved state security and could not be discussed. State security? I repeated. For an opera performance in 1953? I know, seems absurd, but in that era, everything was seen through the lens of politics. Italy was trying to rebuild after the war. There was intense political rivalry between Christian Democrats and communists. The Americans were heavily involved in Italian politics to prevent communist influence. It was a paranoid time. What's your theory? Mariana asked. What do you think really happened? Dr. Marchetti pulled out a folder she'd brought. I can't prove this, but based on fragments I found in newspaper archives and speaking to a few very elderly people who claim to have been there, I believe Giulia Ferretti did something during that performance that was seen as politically subversive. What could she do during an opera? I asked. The lyrics are already written. Ah, but performers sometimes improvise. Add lines, change words, emphasize certain phrases. And La Traviata, remember, is about a courtesan, a woman outside respectable society. It's already a story about social hypocrisy and moral judgment. If Giulia emphasized certain aspects or made subtle changes that drew parallels to contemporary Italian society, it could have been seen as criticism. She showed us a newspaper clipping from a few days after the performance. It was brief, almost dismissive. Technical difficulties marred what might otherwise have been a notable performance at La Scala. The soprano, Miss Ferretti, will not be returning. That's it, Mariana said. That's all they wrote? That's all that was published. But look at this. She showed us another clipping from a regional newspaper from Giulia's hometown, published weeks later. It mentioned that the unfortunate censorship of an artist would not be forgotten, and that brave voices would eventually be heard. Someone knew, I said. The local paper knew what had really happened. Yes, but they couldn't say it directly. Censorship in Italy in the 1950s was real and powerful. Do you know if Giulia had family? I asked. Anyone we could talk to? She had a son. He would be quite old now, in his 80s probably. Last I knew, he still lived in Como. I have his name here. She flipped through her notes. Francesco Ferretti. But I don't know if he would talk to you. He refused to speak to me when I contacted him years ago. That evening, Mariana and I sat in our hotel room debating our next move. We could try to contact Francesco, I suggested. Maybe he'd be more willing to talk now. It's been years since Dr. Marchetti tried. Or maybe he still won't talk and we'll have wasted our time, Mariana countered. We only have a few more days, Peter. Do we really want to spend them chasing this? I think we're close to something real. The government classified documents about an opera performance. That's not normal. There's a story here, and maybe it deserves to be told. She studied my face. This is different from Capri and Naples, isn't it? You're not obsessing. You're excited but measured about it. I think so, and I think part of that is because you're with me. I'm not spiraling into it alone. We're doing this together. Okay, tomorrow we try to find Francesco Ferretti in Como. But if he doesn't want to talk, we respect that and let it go. Agreed. Agreed. Como is about an hour north of Milan by train, a beautiful town at the southern tip of Lake Como. The address we had for Francesco Ferretti was in an older neighborhood with narrow streets and buildings that looked like they'd been there for centuries. The woman who answered the door was in her 50s, friendly but cautious. "I'm looking for Francesco Ferretti," I said in English, hoping she'd understand. "He is my father." "Who are you?" I explained that we were researching the history of La Scala, that we were interested in his mother's performance in 1953. Her expression immediately closed off. "My father does not speak about this. Please leave." "We're not journalists," Mariana said quickly. "We're not trying to cause problems. We just think his mother's story deserves to be remembered properly. She was a great artist who was silenced for political reasons." "That's not fair." The woman hesitated. "Wait here." She returned a few minutes later. "My father will see you, but only briefly. He is 89 and tires easily." Francesco Ferretti sat in a chair by the window, a blanket over his legs despite the warm autumn day. He was frail, but his eyes were sharp, studying us as we entered. "You want to know about my mother?" he said in accented but clear English. "Why?" "Because her story was erased," I said simply. "And that's wrong. Great art shouldn't be buried for political reasons." He was quiet for a long moment. "You know what happened? The truth. We know fragments. We know there was a performance that was supposedly perfect. We know your mother never sang publicly again. We know government documents about it are still classified. But we don't know why." "I will tell you," Francesco said. "My mother made me promise never to speak of it while certain people were alive. But they are all dead now. Everyone from that time is gone. So I can tell you." He settled back in his chair, his eyes distant with memory. "My mother was not political. She loved only music. But in 1953, Italy was very tense. The government was authoritarian, paranoid about communists, about criticism, about anything that might challenge their authority. An opera, you must understand, has always been political in Italy. The audience listens not just to the music but to the words, to what they mean. La Traviata is about a courtesan who is rejected by society," I said. "Yes, and that night my mother made some changes. Small changes, barely noticeable if you weren't paying attention. But she changed some words in the famous aria, changed them to criticize the hypocrisy of the powerful men who controlled Italy. She sang about men who preached morality but lived corruptly. She sang about women being blamed for the sins of men. It was subtle but clear to anyone listening. And the government heard about it," Mariana guessed. "The theater was full of important people that night. Ministers, industrialists, all the powerful men of Milan. They understood what she was saying. And they were furious. After the performance, officials came backstage. They told my mother she would never perform again. They told her if she spoke about what happened, she would be arrested for subversion. They ordered all recordings destroyed, all photographs, everything. They wanted that night erased." "And your mother agreed?" I asked. "What choice did she have? It was 1953. They had the power to do whatever they wanted. So she came home and never sang professionally again. She taught piano to children in Como and tried to forget that night ever happened." "Did she regret it?" Francesco smiled sadly. "No. She told me once that it was worth it. One night of truth, one night of using her art to speak against injustice. That was worth losing everything else. She said she'd lived more in those 3 hours than in all the rest of her life combined." We sat in silence, absorbing this. "Mr. Ferretti," I said carefully, "is there any chance a recording exists? Any at all?" He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why do you want to know?" "Because your mother's voice deserves to be heard. Because political censorship shouldn't erase great art." Because the truth matters. Another long pause. Then he spoke. My father, my mother's husband, was a sound technician at La Scala. He worked the equipment for recordings. That night, he was ordered to destroy the recording of the performance. He said he did. He told the officials he had erased the tapes. But he didn't? Mariana said softly. He made a copy first, on a different tape, hidden in a different case. He kept it for 60 years until he died 10 years ago, and he left it to me with instructions. Release it only when everyone from that time is gone, when no one can be hurt by the truth coming out. And now, I asked, now they are all gone. The officials who ordered the censorship, the politicians who silenced my mother, the men who abused their power, all dead. Only the art remains. Only my mother's voice, frozen in time, waiting to be heard. Will you release it? Mariana asked. Let people hear what they tried to erase? Francesco looked at both of us for a long moment. I am 89 years old. I don't have much time left. My children don't care about opera. They think it's old-fashioned, irrelevant. If I don't do something now, this recording will be lost forever when I die. The same result as if my mother's voice had been erased as intended. He struggled to stand, and his daughter hurried over to help. He shuffled to a cabinet and pulled out a wooden box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a reel-to-reel tape. This is it, he said. My mother's voice. 3 hours and 47 minutes of perfect art, preserved in defiance of those who tried to erase it. If you can help me get this digitized, preserved properly, and donated to La Scala's official archives, I will give it to you. I took the box carefully, feeling the weight of history in my hands. We can do that. I promise we'll handle it with care. One condition, Francesco added. You must tell the true story. Not just that the recording was lost and found, but why it was erased. People need to know that governments tried to silence artists, and that sometimes art survives anyway. The next 2 days were spent working with audio restoration experts in Milan. The tape was old and fragile, but they were able to digitize it carefully, cleaning up the sound without altering the original recording. When we finally heard it, really heard it, both Mariana and I were moved to tears. Giulia Ferretti's voice was everything the legends said. Rich, powerful, emotionally devastating. And when she reached the arias where she'd changed the words, where she'd sung her political criticism, you could hear both the bravery and the artistry. She didn't shout her message. She wove it into the fabric of Verdi's music so elegantly that if you weren't listening carefully, you'd miss it. But if you were paying attention, if you understood both the original libretto and what she'd changed, the message was clear and powerful. La Scala's archivists were stunned when we presented them with the recording and the full story. They agreed to add it to their official collection, with complete documentation of what had happened and why it had been suppressed. This is extraordinary, the chief archivist said. Not just musically, but historically. It documents a moment when art and politics collided, when an artist took a real risk to speak truth. This belongs in our archives, properly contextualized and accessible to researchers and the public. On our last night in Milan, Mariana and I sat on our hotel balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the city lights. You did it again, she said. Found something that had been lost, uncovered a truth that had been buried. We did it, I corrected, together. And this time we did it safely, thoughtfully, without me taking stupid risks or getting obsessed. This is what it should be like. It was actually fun, she admitted, being part of the investigation instead of watching you disappear into it. I liked working together on this. Maybe, I said slowly, this is what I should do, not just randomly stumbling onto mysteries while traveling, but actually seeking out stories that deserve to be told. Lost art, forgotten artists, buried truths. There must be a way to make a career out of that. Documentary researcher? Mariana suggested. Investigative journalism? There are definitely people who do this kind of work professionally. In Brazil, do you think? Could I do something like that there? Maybe. We'll figure it out. We have time. But we didn't have much time. In 3 days, we'd be in Verona. And then, 2 days after that, we'd be on a plane to Sao Paulo. Our European adventure was ending. But as I sat there with Mariana, thinking about Giulia Ferretti's voice being heard after 70 years of silence, I felt hopeful about what came next. I'd spent months discovering that I had a talent for finding lost things, for uncovering hidden stories. Now maybe I could figure out how to do that purposefully, as a way of life rather than a series of happy accidents. Milan had given us Giulia's story, and in doing so, it had helped me see a path forward, not just for surviving in Brazil, but for building something meaningful. A career that used my skills without requiring me to work for morally questionable people. A purpose that satisfied my curiosity without destroying my relationships. The silent opera house had found its voice again, and maybe I was finding mine too. Tomorrow, Verona, and then Brazil, and then we'd see. But I was ready for whatever came next, because I wasn't doing it alone anymore. I was doing it with Mariana, partner in every sense of the word. And that made all the difference.